All right. So with lists, these are another data type, and it allows you to store multiple different kinds of data types inside of them. So some of you coming from other languages may know these as arrays. They're very similar to what an array would be. But the list data type contains multiple values that are in an ordered sequence. And that's the big key with lists, is that they are in an ordered sequence. The term list value refers to the list itself, which is a value that can be stored in a variable or passed to a function. And a list value looks something like this. So if we look at this list, notice that we use square brackets, okay? And this is a list of strings because cat is a string, bat is a string, rat is a string, and elephant's a string, all right? Each value is separated by a comma, space, and then whatever the actual string is that's inside of there, all right? We know they're strings because they have the single quote characters around the beginning and the end. And the list itself always opens with the left square bracket followed by a right square bracket. All right. Those values inside of there is called items. All right. And everything is comma separated inside. So let's look a little bit at these. Matter of fact, I'm going to pull up idle here so we can see. All right. Let's do that and that. And let me shrink this one down or get this out of the way here. There we go. Okay, so if we want to call something my list equals, and then we'd have a square bracket, we could have something like Jason, Ben, Jack, Jenna, etc. Okay, whoops. There we go. Let's fix all these, make sure they're capitals. These are names, right? All right. So this is my list, and I have several different items inside of it. Jason is an item, Ben, Jack, and Jenna is all items. These are all strings. I could have lists with different type in there. So if I could say my ages, we could have something like 38, 12, 17, 39, something like that, where I'd have integers inside of there. Okay. And you can also have a combination or a mix of other ones in there. So we could have something like gender, height, coming up with different things here, right? And so we could say something like male, comma, and this would be a string, right? So male, and then the next one is going to be a height. And so if we do that in inches, let's say 73, and then this would be male. And he would be, say, 60. It's male. Getting so accurate with all this stuff, but whatever. And then we would have, say, a female. And we'll call it 66. All right. So all this is showing is that we have a combination of strings and we have a combination of integers. And we could have floats, we could have other strings, and you can have lists inside of lists. So for example, if we look at this one, if we were stating that this was the gender and the height of these individual people up above, it might make more sense to make them their own list. So you would have something like this, where male 73 is its own list. And then this male 60 is a list. This male 75 is a list. And this female 66 is in a list. And so what we have is what's called a list of lists. Does that make sense? Pull this down here so we can make this a little easier for you guys to see up there. That we have lists inside of this outer list. Okay. We might call this something like gender heights. If we want to get the values out of these, we need to call them by their index. And so lists have what are called indexes. So to get Jason out, if we wanted to print that, we would print my list, square bracket, and then we need to give it the integer of whatever index it is. So indexes for lists start at 0, and then they count their way up. All right. So Jason would be the 0 index of my list. So I'm going to run this real quick. Here, and we're going to call this week 4. Okay, so we can see that we got this output of Jason, and how we got there was we printed out the my list and the 0 index of this list. So this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. So if I want to get Jack back, I need to have my list what? 2, right? That's because we go 0, 1, 2. So if I try running this, I would get back Jack. All right. If I wanted to print out Jack's age, assuming that these are always in the same order, right, as we go across there, how would I get Jack's age back? My ages. I have to give it the
3. How would you?
So you don't want to call the value. That's what we want to print back. You want to call the index. And so remember, indexes always start at 0. So 0, 1, 2, and 3. If we want this one, which should correlate to Jack, we would want 2. Right? So 0, 1, 2, 3. 0, 1, 2, 3. This is the tricky part. It starts at 0. All right. So we would put in 2 for him as well. And if we print this one, you can see that we have Jack 17. All right. If we want to print a combination of the gender and heights, right now we know that that should be what? Gender heights. And what would we use for that index? Yeah. Hold on a second here. We'll make the font a little bit bigger. Oops, somebody asked a question too. Sorry, Austin, let me get you up here so I can see you guys on the screen. All right, format, paragraph. No, that's not what I want. That better?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So for this one, we would also use 2, right? In order to get the index back for him, in which case you would see that it returns that index 2, which is its own list. So if I specifically want to get back his gender, what would I use? The gender falls in which index of that inner list? 0, right? So we would have something like print gender heights. And we would have 2. And then we just chain that with another square bracket of the index that we want, which was 0. And we can print that. So in this case, it's 2, 0, meaning that we pull back the second index list. And inside that list, we want the 0 index of that one. So if we print this one, we can see that we now have Jack 17, male 75, only now we're printing back out that gender. So to make this a little easier in our print statements, we may want to concatenate some strings in here that make some sense, right? So we could say name, colon, space, plus, whoops, there, plus that. We could say age. That. For this one, I'm just going to leave that information. And if we specifically want gender, like that. And if I wanted to print out his height, that would be what? spell it. What would that look like for this part of it? Gender, heights. 2 and what? 1, right? That gets us back to height. And so if we run that, let's see here, probably got a typo here somewhere. Aha. So because we gave his height as an integer, we need to convert that to a string, right? So if we str and wrap that around this so that we can get that. Let's see here. Oh, age was also an integer, so we need to stringify that one too. Like that. There we go. So we have name, age. We are printing out this other one in the middle. Let's go ahead and remove that. And then we have his gender is male and his height is 75. Right. So if we run this one just to see what that looks like. We removed that one that was printing out the whole list. So that now we just have it in the nice order that we want here. Okay. So this is how you would access information out of different lists. You just give the name of the list. You use a square bracket and you need to give the index. Remember, indexes start at 0 and they count their way up from left to right. Okay. If you have a list inside of a list, then the first square bracket is going to be the list that you want to call. In this case, we called this one. And then you would call from the next square bracket inside that list which index you wanted out. Right? Instead of 75, let's convert that to inches. All right. So how would we convert that 75 to inches? Anybody know how we could do that? Or let me put it this way. 75 is inches. That's his height in inches. What would that be if we wanted to say that was in feet? Exactly, right? So we would say something like height equals, and then let's grab the height from him. Right? In this case, we don't want to string that. We grab his height and we divide it by 12. Now we can just print height over here with str height, and that would print that one out. So run. Oops, I forgot to close that one. There we go. And we can see 6.25 feet at this point, right? And if we wanted to just show that that was feet, we would just say plus, and then we could say feet. And that would string that up. Whoops, run. So that we could see that. Let's see here. What did I do? Height. Oops, I put this on the wrong side. That was the problem. There we go. Okay, so now we can see a name, an age, a gender, and we can see that he's 6.25 feet. Okay. So again, these are all lists. This is how we work with those individual ones inside of that. When we call for the index, that needs to be an integer, which means it does not have a decimal point. So we can't ask for my list 1.0. We just ask for my list 1, which is what? My list 1 should give me what name back? Ben, right? Okay. We can also have what are called negative indexes. So for example, Jenna is what index? Well, yes, but it's normally what? 3, right? That is if we were going 0, 1, 2, 3. We can also refer to Jenna as -1, Jack is -2, Ben is -3, and Jason is -4. What that does is take you from right to left. So if you always want the last one in the list and you don't know how long the list is, you can always say -1. That gives you the last one in the list, right? So if we wanted to print Jenna out, we could say something like print name my list, oops, plus my list -1, right? that would get that name. What would it look like to get her age out? Using negatives. We're going to use the ages list, right? So my ages, and what index is she if we're using negatives? -1, right? That's what we used for the other ones, so it would be the same going down here. Let me pull this down here a little bit so I can pull this up. There we go. All right. So next one up would be a gender. And what would that look like in negatives for that? Gender, heights, -1. And what would the negative be in that to grab the gender? So we grab her list here, right? Now, how do I get female out using negatives? Remember, from right to left, we've been using -1, right? -2. So -2 gets us back that one. And then finally, for the age, we would use gender, heights. Or for not for the age, sorry, for height. Stick with what I'm doing here. We would use gender, heights. And again, that is what, -1. And then which one refers to the height? -1 again, right? It's not a trick question. I'm not tricking you today. All right. So if we ran this, we could get Jack's info out, but on Jenna's, whoops, we got to remember that we have to string these, right? Or string. And on this height, we could use this same height that we see up here. So let's take this and put this here. And we would copy this one and put that in place here. That. And then for this last line, yeah, I'll show you here in just a second. Okay. So the idea here is that we're copying the same thing that we were doing for this person, right? It looks on down. The key here is on this height, we use the -1 that we talked about. We're going to divide that by 12 so that we can get that in feet. And then we're just going to print that out again. Notice that I'm using height here and height here, which means I'm defining the variable height here. I'm overriding that with a brand new variable down here for the second one. Yeah. Oh, okay. No, you're fine. Okay, so I print this one. Let's see here. Gender, height's not found. That's because I put a D in there. There we go. And so if we want a blank line, how do we print a blank line? Do you guys remember that from last week? Yep. Just an empty print would put one in there. Why does that work? Does anybody remember why an empty print gives you a new line? What's that? Because you're printing what? Kind of. All print statements terminate the line. That's correct. Remember, there is a variable on print that is by default called end equals, and by default, it's the new line character, right? That's inherent. If I said that was something else, like say 3/ends, and I printed this, notice that I would get 3 lines between that in between. So by default, the print statement will take whatever you put in there. In this case, we put nothing if we took this out, right? It'd be something like this. It has a variable called end, and end is always set to a new line character. So if we wanted more, we could set it to more if we wanted to. All right. So just a simple print, we'll do that. And then we can see that we get the output in her case. So Jack shows up as 6.25 feet. She shows up as 5.5 feet. Everybody see how we got that information out? This one used the positive indexes. This one used the negative indexes going out. All right. If we wanted to cut two people out of there, we could use what's called a slice. So for example, if I wanted the name of the kids, which is Ben and Jack, what would I use to do that? I could use a print. I would give the name of my list, which is going to be my list, right? And of my list, which one is Ben? Where does he start at? What's his index number? 1, right? So I would say my list 1. I can put a colon, and then this number is up to, but does not include. So if I wanted to just include Jack, but not Jenna, what would I put there? So 0, 1, 2. Remember that this value means up to, but does not include. So 3, right? So 1 to 3 means that it's going to give me back 1 and 2 going up to 3, but not including that. So if I print this, I should get a list to print out on the screen that has the name of the kids. All right. Everybody see how I got that? And of that list, if I wanted to print Ben, what would that be? Yeah, I wanted to print just Ben out. What index would he be?
1 to 2.
Okay. 1 to 2 in this. And I would get back a list with Ben in it. What would I want if I already have that list? If I go back to 3. So now I have a list of Ben and Jack. But remember, this is returning me a list. If I want to return just the string Ben out of this list, what would I have to do here?
Take out the 3 in the colon.
Out of this list. So if we store this now and call this kids, right? So kids equals my list of 1 to 3. So what would I use to print kids? Print kids, and I just want Ben out of there. So of this list, Ben is in the what index? 0, right? So I could say in my kids list, he is 0, and then I could print out just Ben down below here. Everybody see that? You weren't wrong, but the difference was it was going to print out a list as opposed to printing out just a string. All right. If I wanted to have a new list of the adults, what would I put in that list? Adults equals my list. Can't really do it, right? Because they're on opposite ends of that. There's no way to give a slice that would return just the last one and the first one. Does that make sense? You have to include everything in between. So you have to start from left to right or from right to left. But you can't just grab piecemeal which ones they are. However, we could create a new list of adults, which would look like this. In which case, if we wanted to put Jason in there, how would we say we get Jason out of my list? 0, right? So we would have my list 0 for Jason. And to get Jenna out, we would have my list what? -1 or 3. Great. So let's use 3. And then we close that list. And now we have the adults list and we have a kids list. And if we wanted to print out the adults, say I wanted to print out Jenna, what would she be in that new adults list? 1, right? So we print that out. We test that. Oops, forgot to close that one. And there you go. So now we have Ben back as the kid and Jenna back as the adult that we wanted to pull out particularly. All right, does everybody see how that all works? The whole goal of this exercise was that you guys understand indexes. Indexes start at what? Zeros. If I want the last index out of a list, not knowing how long it is, what could I use? -1. And if I have lists inside of lists, I have to use what? A second square bracket to say which slice or what I want out of the inside. I could also slice information. If there was a bunch of names in there or a bunch of values, I could slice that out as well. Perfect. Now, you guys already know this. If I wanted to see how many characters were in a name, I use the what function? The len function, right? I can also use the len function on a list to determine how many things are inside that list. So if I wanted to see in a print and say there are blank values, right? Values in the my list. Okay. Now we obviously have to put that value in here. So what would that look like? We would say something like the len of my list, which would get us back an integer. We would need to convert that out to a string to concatenate that. I'll bring this up here so you can see the whole thing. So this would tell us how many values are inside my list, right? We have this string, there are, then we are going to say how many we got, and then we put out the rest of this. So if we run this, we can see there are 4 values in here. I need to have another space. Let's do that real quick. And we can see there are 4 values in my list. So we can calculate the length. So if I don't know how many are total in here, then I don't know what index they're all in, right? So len will help you calculate the total length so that you can then find out what is in the 3 index or the 4 index or the 5 index, etc. Right? So yep, that gets you back to len. What else we got here? All right, so say I want to change Jenna to Jenna Lee, right? Her full name's Jenna Lee. So to change that inside this list, again, which index is she? 3, right? So I would say my list 3, and now we could change that from Jenna to Jenna Lee. It would look something like this. I could put that right there. So if now we say my list 3 equals Jenna Lee, well, then if I want to print all of her information again, which I'll just copy and steal all this that we already had up above. And if we run that, we can see the first time it ran, it was Jenna. I changed it then to Jenna Lee, and so therefore it updated the information from there on out. So if you want to change a value up here, right, you just say my list, given the index, and then change the value to whatever you want. Everybody see what I did there? Any questions? Okay. Just like strings, we can have list concatenation and list replication, which means concatenation is going to be what? Combining, basically adding the 2 lists together, combining them. So if we have, like in this example here, if I wanted to combine my ages and my list, I could do something like my stuff equals, and then we put the list and then add the other one. So we would have my list plus my ages, I think is what we called it. And that will combine 2 lists together. And then we could print my stuff to see what it looks like. If we run this one, you can see that it took those 2 lists together and combined them. Regardless of whether I had strings in one and integers in the other, it doesn't matter. It just creates one big list. All right. If I wanted to concatenate that, my ages, for example, I could have something like my ages stuff. I don't know. I'm running out of variable names today. We'll call this my ages times 4. And if we print my ages stuff, print my ages stuff, you will see that it took the ages list, right? 38, 12, 17, 39, and did 4 of those. It added 4 of those total in that entire list. So just like we would with a string, we can do the same thing with lists. All right, anybody got any questions on that one? All right, now obviously there's a lot of things that we would want to do with lists, right? We know how to change a variable. What if we wanted to delete a name out of here? All right, so say I wanted to delete Jenna out of this list. All right, don't tell her I said that. It's recorded, but don't tell her I said that. All right, we're going to delete Jenna out of this list. I'm going to clean a little bit of this up so that we're just up to this first one here. All right, so if I want to delete Jenna out of the list, I have to say del my list, and then what's her index? Anybody remember? 3, right? So we could say 3, and we could check that by doing this ahead of time. So we could say print my list, right? We delete it. We're going to print my list again to see if it changed. And if we run that, we will see that the first time she was in there, the second time she is not. Now, did that change the index for Jason, Ben, and Jack? No, in that case, it did not. What if we deleted Ben out of this list? What's his index? 1, right? Now, if we run this, notice that we got rid of Ben, but that slid down the indexes for Jack and Jenna. So now Jenna is no longer index 3. She is index what? 2, right? So it will change indexes if you delete somebody out in the middle. Right? Anybody have any questions on deleting or changing a value? What else might you want to do with a list? Yeah. We could do that. Okay. That's a little bit further ahead, but that's fine. We could do that now. Say I wanted to print all those lists out. So right now you said print my list, right? So for those of you online, he said, what would it happen? What would it look like to print them out vertically? So right now, when we print my list, notice it prints out a list. And if we ever print out information to the user or print it out to the terminal, we should never print a list to the screen. Okay. You should print this in a way that it looks nice and clean, like what you would expect it to. So to do that, we could use a for loop in order to print that out. So if we say for name in my list, print name. What is that doing? That's taking my list up here. Okay. We're assigning the variable name every time it loops through there. And so the first time name is equal to what? Not 0, but whatever the first name is in the list, right? Jason. The next time it goes through the loop, it's going to be what? Ben, and then Jack, and then Jenna, right? So if we run this, we should see that output just here. Jason, Ben, Jack, Jenna. All right. This is how you should print out the contents of that list. Yeah.
Is that because the print function like cuts that line?
No, it's because when you use a for loop in a list, it takes the first value in the list and it's just printing that one variable. That's what you asked it to print, right? So we could say something like name here, and then it would print on or something like that. The idea is that you're creating a list. This is no different than when you guys created a list with the range command, right? So if we did range and I wanted the range from 1 to 10, what would I use here? There you go, 1 to 11, right? The equivalent of range of 1 to 11 is the same thing as having a list that says 1, 2, 3. Bring this down here so you guys can see that. Bring this back here so you can see this. It's not clean. Okay. So the command range of 1 to 11 is the same thing as having a list that says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9. I got all my commas off again, didn't I? Okay, 9, 10. Okay. This command essentially generates this list. So when you guys were doing for I in range of 1, 11, in order to get 1 through 10, and we said print I, right? All that's doing is the first time it went through that list, it printed 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, etc. So the range command is doing the same thing as creating a list that looks like this. So if I plug this into here, I would get the same output as I would have using the range command. Everybody understand how that's working? Okay. So that is how you can print them out vertically. That's how you use a for loop to print the results of any kind of list that you're using out there. Now, when we want to work with the list, this is great if I have all these names to begin with, right? But let's pretend that I don't have any of this information, but I need to create it. Okay, so let's erase this. And let's start with lists that are empty, and we need to fill that information in. So if I call it names equals an empty list, and I have ages equals an empty list, and then I could have something like gender is an empty list, and I could have what was the other one I had? Height, right? So height equals an empty list. Okay. So now that we have empty lists, we need to add something to that list. So to do that, we want to print a question to the user. Print, what name would you like to add? Okay. And then we need to get that input from the user. So we would say something like name equals input. And then once we get that from the user, we need to tell it which list we want to add it to. So we would have names dot append, and then we append whatever we want to append to that names list. So in this case, it's just the word name. Now, while we do this, we're going to create this in a while true loop. And the idea here behind this while true loop is we're going to keep asking these questions from the user. So we get a name in from them and we append it to the names. Then we print what age is, and then we can append that name here so it makes a little more sense, right? Because we already know the name now. Plus name, do a question mark. Does everybody see what I did there? We took the name that they took in from the first one, and we're just going to keep using that variable so we can prompt this question. So now we would say something like age equals an input and gather in some kind of input from the user. And to add that to the ages list, it would look like what? Look at the names one for a hint. We want to add this age to our ages list. We would need what? Yep, ages.append. And we're going to append that variable, which is age. All right. We're going to rinse and repeat for these other two. So we would have something like print what gender is plus name plus question mark. And we could say something like gender equals input. Get that input from the user. We would have genders dot append gender. And then last, append means we're going to add it, right? So we have empty lists up here. We want to add whatever the user typed in to those lists. And the last part here is heights. So what height in inches is that. We get in their height equals input backwards. And then from there, we can add that to our heights. Go up and fix this input here, because that should be the other direction. And this one should be the other way. There we go. All right, so I'll give you a minute to catch up with those. So the idea with our little program here is that we start off with empty lists, and then we're going to gather that information from the user. And the first thing we're going to do is gather the name, then the age, the gender, and the height. We're going to reuse the name for that user so that it comes all the way down. All right. At the very end, we need to print the results of each of those. So we could say print names, right? And then on the next line, we use what? How could we go through each one of the names in the list?
We use a while true.
We wouldn't want a while true, but you're on the right track. We want a loop, but we want what kind of loop? Not a 3 loop, but a 4 loop, right? So we go for name in names, print name. Okay. Then we say print ages. For age in ages. Print age. I'm just going to keep going through and repeating that. So print genders. Gender and genders. Print gender. And print heights. Heights. Print height. Okay. And then at that point, we'll start this whole loop back over again so we can add more people to it. All right, so if we run this, we start this new program and it says, what name would we like to add? We're going to start with Jason. All right, what age is Jason? Put 38. What gender is Jason? We're going to put male. What height is Jason in inches? We'll use 63. And then you can see it prints out the results of each one of those lists. All right. We add Ben in next. So we put Ben. What age is Ben? 12. Male. Height in inches. 50. You can see now that those lists are going down. That's a little cumbersome to read. So we should probably put a new line character after each one of these, right? So just a print. Something like a print. There's a method to the madness here. All right. So what does that do? Notice that we start over from scratch. Nothing is saved now, right? So we go Jason, 38, male, 63, and we go through, right? 63 is not the right number. Name you would like to add, Ben. Ben is 12, Ben is 50. Ben is not a gender of 50. I'm off here. All right, so that's a good question. If we want to sanitize this information based on what you guys know from last week, how could we make sure that on age they're typing in an age? Anybody remember how we do that? We could use an if. Yep. So if we did this in a little while true loop here, right? We would check what? We got this age in if you're not far off. There was another one that we could try. So the way to convert a string over to an integer is to use the what? Which function would we use to convert a string to an integer? The int function, right? So if I did the int of age and they typed in letters, what would happen? It would crash, right? Because we can't convert letters to that. So if we wanted to try that, remember that we can use try and accept. So we're going to try to convert age to an integer. And if it works, then we could break out of the loop because then we know they typed in a number. We could do an exception and say something like, that is not a valid number. Please try again. Okay. Also, by the way, if this works, before we break out, let's go ahead and add them to the list. Does everybody see what this little loop is doing? So we're going to ask for their age. We're going to get the age in from the user. We're going to try to convert that over to an integer. If it works, then go ahead and append that age, right? Notice that we're not converting this age we're appending over to an integer. We could, so we would say something like age equals int age, and now we're going to append that in so that it matches the one that we had before. If that all works, let's go ahead and break out of this while loop here, not the overall one, just this one. If it doesn't work, we're going to wait for a valid number. So let's go ahead and run this just to see what we got. We have a name, Jason. If I type in gibberish, notice it says it's not a valid number now. Does everybody see how this is working? It takes my gibberish, tries to convert it to an age or an integer. It says, nope, that failed. If we didn't have try and accept, what would happen? Let's just put this in here. Right? If I run this ahead of time, and I say, Jason, I put gibberish in, we're going to get a value error, right? So this try and accept will catch that error and say, if it is valid, continue on. If it's not valid, print our own little error message to us. That way, the program doesn't crash like this. Okay, how could we check gender? And I don't want to start a political thing here. Let's just focus on, for the time of this, if that there's male and female for this. Okay. So if I know I'm having them type this in, how could I have them check what they're typing in here? This comes back to what you were saying earlier. There you go. If. Yep. If gender equals female. Or we could say something like gender equals female with a capital F, right? And we could even go one step further and say, or gender equals F, right? We could put all the options that we wanted to match for the female side. Doesn't matter how many of those that we chain along, because we're using or for that. If that is right, then go ahead and set that, which is going to be this here. Genders, male appeal, or all the way through. Now, we could do this for just females all the way through, in which case we would need a elif for the males, right? And then we would copy this string all the way through here. And this would be something like male. This would be male. Or this would be an M. Then we would do the same thing. We go ahead and append it. By the way, we would need to break out of this while loop after we append. And then we could use an else, and we could print something like that's not a valid answer. please use male, female, or MF, something like that. Pull this over here so we can see it. Something like that. Okay. Does everybody see how that helps sanitize our two gender options in here? Now you can put all the other genders in there. I don't care what you do in there, but this is just going to go through and put those two in. All right. Now, how would we sanitize height in inches? Same as age, right? I was hoping somebody would just catch on to that. All right. So the goal for inches is all we're looking for right now is that it's a number, right? So we're just going to copy and paste this in that we did for age. We're going to replace the age question in the height with what we have for this one, height, right? We are going to try to convert that height to an integer. So this is height. We are going to append it if it is correct. So heights. Dot append. We're going to append the height. And if so, we say that's not a valid number and go. All right. Let's just check to see if these initial ones that we got are working correctly now that we changed everything. Notice we didn't do anything with name at this point because we don't know how to do anything with a name, right? So what name would we like to add? We have Jason. What age is Jason? I type in gibberish. It does not take it until I give a valid number. So if I put 38 in, it takes it. What gender? If I type in gibberish, this time it gives us an error message that says it must be male, female, or MF. So I'm going to use M. It took it. What is a height in inches? Gibberish. It does not take it. We have to actually give it. So 73. And then it goes ahead and prints out the rest and starts that loop back over. Everybody see how our little program's working? All right. Now, here's a problem. We have a while true, and then we have while trues inside of it. So based on last week, we should probably do what? What could we do with this chunk of code? What could we do with this chunk of code? This chunk of code?
Else.
Not an else. What did we learn last week?
Create a function.
Functions, right? We could actually call those functions so that we could call them over and over and over. So if we had something like get name, does anybody remember how to write a function? Def get name. And inside there, we take this code for getting a name, in which case we just put this in a little while true. And we put this in here, right? And right now, remember, we're not sanitizing anything for the name. We're just taking in whatever they give us. We could do a def get age, in which case we could now take out this code and put it in here. Okay. We have def get gender. We're going to take this code, put it in there. And what's our last one? Get our height. And we could steal the code out for our height. Put that up here. Now in our main loop, instead of this, what would we have here? If we wanted to call that function from up above, which was get name, what would we put here in our main loop? Remember, this is our main loop. Anybody remember how we call a function? We wouldn't print the get name, but we would use what? Just call the function name, right? So get name in the two parentheses, get age, the two parentheses, get gender, oops, gender, and get height. Okay. The idea being that now we're in this little loop. We could print this out. Got so much stuff in here. And at the end, it's going to print out each one of those individual lists. Okay. Instead of having all this in our main loop, let's create a function that says print the lists. So def print lists. Now here we need what? Remember that these lists are on the outside. Does anybody remember what that's called? Are these local variables or global variables? Global, right? So in order for us to get access to them, we need to what? What's that? We have to use a global statement, right? So in each one of these, we're looking to append to those lists. We need to go to each one and say global names. That allows us to actually modify this outer one. This will be global ages, global gender, genders, and global heights. All right, that lets us modify all those. And then on this print statement, we actually don't need to bring them in because we're not modifying them. We're just printing them, right? So we would just take this code here, Control C, paste it in here, and it does all that for us. So now in our main loop, at the very end, we just call print lists. All right, let's see what that all did now that we modified and cleaned that all up. So now we're to a name. So the first thing this thing did in this main loop is it called get name. It bounces up here, gets the name of everything that's inside of there. So we're going to put Jason. We're going to try to add another one. And what happens? We didn't break, right? So here we need to make sure we break out of this inner while loop when we do that. Great catch. So let's run this again. Now we got Jason. Now we say name is not defined, right? Does everybody see why this quit working? Because now when we went to get age, we were using name before, but now it has no clue what name is in order to pull that out. We would have to go grab the names in whichever one we just put. This is going to make this a whole lot more complicated for each one of these that we just set up. So to fix that, what we could do is we're appending this name and we're going to break out, but at the end of this function, let's return name. Okay, so that returns it back to the user. And we're going to say this is name equals get name. Now we're going to pass that name into each one of these other ones. Okay. What that means is when we come up to these functions, we gather the name so that we could then place that in here. Does everybody see why we made that change? Before we had it in one nice long global variable list, and therefore it had access to name. Now that it doesn't, we want to make sure that that first one, when we gather it, it not only adds it to the names list, but we're going to return that name back out to the user. Then we need to pass that name into these other functions. So we have Jason. There we go. Now we got an age for a valid number. What's the gender? Again, this is asking for M or F. Height in inches. We need to have that. So 73. And what name would you like to add? It started all over again. All right. Is there anything else we could do with age to make sure that we get a valid age? Right now, we're just checking to see they type in a number. What other kind of check should we have there before we actually add it?
Not negative.
Not negative. All right. So what would that look like? One, we're going to try this, right? And so we would say something like if age is what? Greater than, well, can they be age 0? Okay. And then technically they wouldn't be 0, they would be like 0 point something, right? Whatever. That's fine. For the purposes of what you're talking about, that's fine. So 0 then, age is greater than or equal to 0. All right. Then we would go ahead and add them. Let's do not, which means that doesn't match. Does that make sense? So if they do not do that, what else would we want? Let's go back this way. If age is greater than or equal to 0, what other condition? Probably not 1,000 years old unless they're a vampire, right? So, and age is less than or equal to what? 110. What's the oldest person living? Oldest person alive ever. All right, she got to be 122, right? So 123 should cover us unless somebody's out to beat her regular. All right, so now we're going to make sure that both these conditions are true, in which case they are greater than or equal than 0 or less than or equal to 123. Then we will go ahead and append that age. That makes sure that somebody isn't typing in an unrealistic age. All right. How about gender? That one's pretty much covered, right? It's either one of these two options or it doesn't work. What about height? Yeah, we don't want them too tall and we probably don't want them too short either.
6'5".
Yep. So anybody remember his name? Anybody remember the tallest man that was ever alive? First name was Robert. Last name was
Radlow or something.
not Redlow.
What is it?
So Robert Waldo. Now there might be somebody taller than him now, but tallest person in the world, it still is Robert Waldo. Great. He was 8'11", by the way. And weighed 439, but that is actually super skinny looking at 8'11". Okay, so let's call it 9 foot as the tallest person ever. All right. What's 9 foot in inches? You don't want to do math in your head, but what could we do then? 108. Yeah, so we could do it that way too. We could say max height equals 9 times 12, right? That would give us all of that in inches. In which case we could then see if this person is higher than that. So we would say something like if, let's get max height back up here. If height is greater than or equal to max height, right? We could then say it was wrong, or if it was not a valid answer. Notice that we didn't ever do that here. We should probably do that, right? In which case we have an else. Here, it's not that it's not a valid number. That is not a valid age. That is not a valid age. Okay, start them over. This is saying it's not a valid number. We could just say that is not a number, right? Because if we can't turn it to an integer, it's not a number. All right, let's clean this one up. If they are greater than that, great. And what we should probably get the lower end in there, right? So what's the lower end on height?
1 inch.
I mean, no.
Oh, it's actually Joy. Yeah, I was gonna say it's Joyetta. She's pretty tiny. 21 inches. All right. That's actually the smallest man. I was just gonna say, so babies actually come in less than 21 inches. That would actually be a really big baby. So world's smallest baby in the world 7.5 ounces. It's pretty tiny. And let's do a height. Smallest height. Okay, we got the page. 24 centimeters long. All right, so now we're going to do more math. 9.4 inches. All right, pretty tiny. So let's call it 9 inches. So we would say if height is less than 9 and the height is greater than the max height. So there was 2 things I wanted to show you in this one. One, we obviously know how to set our numbers, right? You should also do a little bit of research to figure out whether or not these are valid numbers. And 2, if you need to do a little bit of math and don't want to do it in your head, just set a variable called max height and use that as a reference from further on. Because maybe we want to come back and say, this person is blank inches less than the max height of the tallest person ever lived. Something like that. All right. So we're just going to keep it simple and say if it's less than, or actually in this case, if it's greater than, or if it's less than, break. Otherwise, we have an else. We're going to print back to the user. That is not a valid height. There you go. So we got to make sure that we have directions correct on this. If height is greater than 9 and less than that, then we want to save it, right? So let's go back and check our age. If we're greater than 0 and age is less than that. Is that right? Okay. You caught it before I could even write. Good work, Gage. Okay, so we've got that one, the print there. Let's see if our program is a little better now. So we have Jason. We type in gibberish for an age. That didn't work. I am 199 years old. That's not a valid age. I am -18. That's also not a valid age. So we are now what? 117. Aha. Gender, height. I want to be 900. It's not a valid height. I want to be 2 inches tall. Not a valid height. All right. This also keeps people from typing in something like 6, thinking that they're typing in 6 foot. Does that make sense? Because we're asking specifically for inches. And as long as our value is higher than anybody that would type in 9 foot tall, then we should be fine. Okay. So let's do the scan 73. And then we can see that we print out the list of all those in there. Now this looks fairly simple and it seems like a meaningless program, but you just started to build something that could be basically formed into your midterm project, right? In this case, our project was we wanted to get information on the family, call it a genealogy or whatever you're doing. Right now, we're gathering their name, their age, their gender, and their height. Maybe we grab other information and we're storing that in a bunch of lists. In the future, we may store it into dictionaries. And there may be a reason to do that, which there is, and we'll explain that at a later time. So this is the point of lists, is that we want to store information in from the user and that we have the ability to add information in. Now, if I wanted to delete somebody out of here, I would have to know their what in order to delete them out of that list. Their what? Not their name, but their index at this point, right? Remember the delete statement, we have to know what index they are in order to delete them out. So instead of using index, we would want to try to use something else in working with that list, right? So we talked about for loops, we talked about in and not in. We'll come back to the multiple assignment trick. You can use what's called enumerate. Enumerate with lists is something like being able to print the index and the value of that list all in one string. All right, so enumerate's kind of handy there. Let's see here. Let's change our code a little bit. Instead of printing all of these lists out, let's call this print random name. Right, and this is going to randomly print a name from our list of names. So to get a random one in there, does anybody remember how to use random? Import random. And it always goes at the top. Then down here inside of our list, we would have something like what? Say we wanted to just go off of the index of what it is, right? So how would we know what to feed it? If anybody remembers, if we wanted to create a random number, we would say something like number equals what? Random dot. What's that? Rand int. There you go. Good job, Austin. So rand int, and we would say something like 1 to 40, right? Well, we don't know how many names are in this list. So how could we gather that? We already talked about that before. How do we calculate the total number of things that are in a list? The int function. Is it the int function? What function would we use to calculate how many things are in a list? The len function, right? So we could say len or list len length, I don't know, whatever we want to call it here. List length equals the len of whatever list we want to calculate. In this case, we want to calculate names. Okay. What does that give us? Gives us some, whatever the total length is. So if we calculate it right away, our length is what? 0. Sorry for those online. They're doing construction right above us. Okay. If we get the first time through, the list length is going to be 0. If we calculate it with the name in there, it's going to be 1, right? So if we want to calculate a random number that always starts at either 0 to what? The list length. Does anybody remember random int? Does it go up to but not include, or does it include the last number? I'm trying to put the first 3 weeks together now here. It does include. Good job, Austin. So it's going to include whatever that list length is. So if we calculate the list of names and it has one name in it, pause for comedic effect. Super loud. Okay. So he's going to calculate the list length of names. We go from 0, we have 1, then it would give us a number between 0 and 1, right? Now, that assumes that we at least have something in there. So do we really want that index? Because remember, if there's one item in there and we get back to number 1, is there a 1 index? There's not, right? There's only 0 as an index. So what we would want is to make sure there's a list of there in there. So we would say something like, if list length equals 0, then we could print something like there are no names in the list. You see that? Yeah. So Zoom thinks I'm playing music as it's vibrating through the sound there. Okay. All right. So if its length is 0, then we don't want to do anything else. Then we're going to calculate the length of it. Get a number. This was a really good video up until right now when we had to have construction. Okay. Let's see. Number, rand int, list length. $3 to the person that kicks that ladder. No, I'm kidding. Don't do that. All right. So we get a number back from the list length and we get that in. And if we want to print What were we doing here with the random number? Does anybody remember?
No.
Oh, we were trying to print a random name. That's what it was. Print random name. There we go. So if I have my names and I print in this random number, we should get back a random name, and we want to print that. Let's try our code here and make sure that all works like we'd expect. So print random name, and instead of print random list, we're going to print random name. Okay. All right, so we're going to add a name. Oh, great. All right, so 38, male, and 73. All right. What happened? So we got an index error, and that is because what? Anybody guess what our random number was?
Probably too high, not zero.
Yeah, but how would it get too high? So we calculated our list length and got what? What should be the result of this? Well, we just added my name, right? So this is running after we added my name to the list. So this would equal 1, right? List length equals 1. So we're asking for a random int between 0 and 1. No. The result is, in this case, that the number was 1. But if I try to plug 1 directly into here, what happens? There is no 1 index, right? So we need to make sure that we say -1. So we take whatever number's in there and -1, because it's always the 0 index is the first number. Does everybody get what we're shifting here? So random is going to give us a number between 0 and 1. And if we get 1 and we want to print the 1 index back, then we have to subtract 1 minus 1, which gives us back 0. This is very complicated and shouldn't be there, right? Everybody get that? I lost a bunch of people in this one. All right, ignore the random function that we just talked about. All right. The idea is if we wanted to randomly pick a name, we don't need to calculate a random index and pull that random index and do all that. We have a cool little one called def get random name, right? And random has a function for us to do that. So if we say print random dot random choice, then we just pass in the list that we wanted to pick a random one from, names. And it will randomly pick a name out of that and print it out. Everybody see what we got there? I was taking you the long way to tell you there's a short way at the end. So if we run this, we put in Jason. Here, 32, male, 73. And it says print random name is not defined. That's because I called it now get random name. That's correct. Jason, 38, male, 73. All right. Module has no choice called random choice, right? So is it random choice? Let's go back up here. It's random dot choice, right? So here, that thing has got me. So it's not here, it's just random dot choice. So we run that. Let's see if we finally get what we're looking for here. Jason, 32, male, 73. And notice it printed out Jason. Why did it print out Jason and not Ben? Exactly. There's only Jason in the list. So it can only randomly choose the one that's in the list. So now if we add Ben in, that time it so happened to pick Ben. Well, let's add Jenna in there. Jenna, he's only 33 inches tall, right? And that one it happened to pick Jenna on that side. All right, but we could build out a menu function that could say something like press 1 to enter a name, press 2 to enter an age, et cetera, et cetera. And then we could have one of those that would be press 5 to get a random name from the list. All right. So we have random choice. We could also use random.shuffle, which will shuffle everything inside of that list. then we can always pull the last one from the list with what index? -1. All right. We learned something today. All right. What else we got? Because this class ends at now, right? We're past 6 minutes. Okay, good cutoff point. All right. So when we get back, we'll talk about augmented and we'll talk about all the other things you want to do with the list, like add, remove, exchange, all sorts of other stuff. All right. So we'll end this recording and we will see everybody on Thursday.